Did you ever obtain your dream job to realize it wasn't actually what you wanted? Why did it not live up to expectations? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. I always wanted to be a flight attendant. Then I actually was one. No thanks ever again. But for a few years it was fun. Then it just became a series of indistinguishable hotel rooms, and it wasn't worth putting up with the passengers anymore. Answer: a series of indistinguishable hotel rooms. This is why I quit my dream job I got when I was 18. Complete nepotism, but a friend of friend was like, "You're good with computers, ain't you?" And for 2 years, I flew around the world as part of an installations team for satellite internet and microwave communications links. I will always look forward to first business class travel, but those hotel rooms are the same world over, and I really resented having to eat out for all 3 meals every single day. Couldn't even make myself a slice of toast how I like it, just reliant on someone in room service and it being cold by the time it gets to you. Story 2. I worked a lot of physical demanding jobs during my 20s and had these recurring fantasies about working in a store, sitting all day waiting for people to buy something, and have all that free time. Well, a couple months ago, I found that job. Great pay, some benefits, great bosses, but every day it's slower than the last, and weirdly enough, I come back home tired from doing almost nothing all day long. Tough with that? Now, sometimes I fantasize about going back to my old job, where I would end up covered up in sweat and dirt, but at least there was a feeling of accomplishment so dumb I dislike it. Edit: yes, I tried to use that free time on something educational. First it was programming, then knots, not sure why. Got bored and started Portuguese to learn how to learn so I could move to more serious subjects and stop abandoning interests. I'm planning to study English formally instead of picking it up through memes, but I never get that right motivation, discipline, mental state to actually do it. To do anything at all, I just play mobile MOBAs for hours. Answer: yep, I did that. I went from working in operations to working as an analyst on the admin side, and I always felt so guilty because I never felt like I did real work while all my former coworkers were busting their jerk in the role I was just in. Physically, the job was easier, but the boredom of constant meetings and useless projects wore me down quicker than any physical job. I barely made it a year in that role. Story 3. My first job out of college was as a forestry field tech. Turns out camping is way less fun when you work 10 hours, don't have cell service, are on a random flat spot you found, and there's no one to talk to. Now make that 8 days in a row. Your only water is in jugs in the work truck, and you're covered in grime and wearing the same clothes for the entire time. Now I get to stay in a cabin during field season. Having running water, a bed, and 4 friendly people on the crew is a godsend. I am so much happier just having company and running water. Adventure be darn. Story 4. Never really enjoyed driving, but always wanted to learn to fly. Dropped $10K on a pilot's license and found out flying was just driving with up and down added. Weird was how quickly a childhood dream turned to meh. Answer: I'm learning to fly right now and I love driving. I've even thought about being a delivery driver before. Weirdly enough, I also kind of like the endless checklists. I like knowing what's coming next and being well prepared for it. I want to be a pilot someday, and I hope it doesn't turn into meh. It's the only career I've ever been truly excited about. Story 5. When I was younger, I desperately wanted to work on the railway as the money was great, and I really loved railways and everything in that world. I eventually managed to get a job as a welder with a local firm. It was fudge wank. Permanent nights working every weekend in all weather with equipment that weighed an absolute ton that had to be loaded up dark embankments. I was working with thermite and explosive gases, usually after pushing all the gear about 3 or 4 miles down the track. One Christmas, I worked a shift on a site where a guy was eliminated the previous weekend after getting his arm chopped off by an excavator. They had a collection box in the site cabin with a picture of him and his young kid on it. Fudge heartbreaking. And to top it off, everyone I worked with was a complete and utter cunt. Fudge shoot job. Story 6. I dreamt about working in veterinary medicine my whole life. When I finally did, I ended up traumatized. It wasn't the blood, the abuse, or even the euthanasia. It was how we just didn't talk about it. Bad day, don't talk about it. Got hurt? Don't talk about it. Rude pet parent? Don't talk about it. Burn out? Don't talk about it. I felt so alone in situations where having support was essential. Answer: I felt the same for vet tech. Thankfully, you have to volunteer 20 hours before you go to school. While I found what I helped with fascinating and the surgeries were awesome to be a part of, I know I couldn't do it. Every last one of them talked about how they doubted they would be staying at this job forever, and the only woman who was there for 15 years said almost no one lasts longer than 5 years. Story 7. Healthcare. It's one of the most soul-crushing jobs out there. A kid in the pediatric intensive care unit with severe injuries while his parents tell conflicting stories on how he got injured. Knowing and seeing what teratogenic is, children getting severe infections and getting declared brain dead, and then you have to tell the parents that their kid is now just a living meat bag. Pay is good at least. Answer. That's a tough one. I used to call on various medical professionals. One of my clients was a neonatologist. We had a few hours on the golf course to talk, but the one thing he answered about choosing and being able to handle that profession was, even though I lose a fair amount of patients, it's all about the one you can save. We don't give enough credit to those who endure daily what most of us couldn't handle once. Story 8. Yes, I wanted to be a freelance graphic designer because I heard you work for yourself. Turns out you can have 18 whole bosses at once. Story 9. Working as a chemist in an academic research lab. Academia is full of narcissistic nut jobs that pretend like their research is the holy grail of their field when it's actually practically inconsequential. The stakes are so low that the results don't matter, and everyone is just scavenging for what little funding they can pull together for something nobody really wants or needs. The amount of pettiness, sabotage, and frankly fraud is rather pathetic, but they face little to no repercussions because, again, nobody cares. Which is why I now do research in a corporate lab. Answer, my life plan was always to do a PhD and work as an academic, but I bailed after my master's. I heard so many horror stories from PhD students and junior academics. Academia is so often a brutal competition for places, inadequate funding, or precarious and underpaid jobs. So many academics are on temporary contracts well into their 30s that it can encourage petty and cutthroat behavior. The limited funds and jobs places an undue emphasis on the originality of research as well. Academics often have to pretend, or worse, convince themselves, that their next article on their incredibly niche specialism, which might only be read, let alone cited, by fewer than a handful of people, really is the most important thing in the world. Story 10. I am a teacher, and when I first graduated college, I couldn't decide what age range I wanted to teach. My first job was 412 Orchestra. At first, this was amazing because I could guide the same students from beginners to graduating, but I quickly learned that the 412 position was supposed to be a 3-person job and not a 1-person job. I unfortunately had to quit because I was so overwhelmed and my school wouldn't hire anybody else. I lasted 6 years and I don't regret it, but I also don't miss it. Story 11. I worked for a small nonprofit doing work that I was super passionate about. I thought it was going to be a dream job. In reality, I was super overworked and underpaid. And being such a small organization, there was lots of interpersonal drama that I was just not into. I now work a more corporate job, but it's still work I'm passionate about and makes a difference. And getting paid over double than what I made previously, my workload is manageable, and I am way less stressed. I also really like my coworkers and boss, and I work from home full-time. The job I was unsure about wound up being the dream job. Answer, this was my experience too, working at a nonprofit. The boss was a narcissistic POS who hired mostly via nepotism. Family member? Sure, you get a high salary for little work. Family friend? A job was virtually guaranteed at a senior position. I worked my way up from admin to a senior role. I loved my job. It was something which had been a hobby, which I actually got paid for, but they had an incredibly high staff turnover. Before I left, I was expected to do the entire work of the 8 people who had been in my department previously. Surprise, surprise, they all left for higher wages and less stress. I tried to explain that one person could not do all the work. Instead of hiring, they gave me a manager who knew nothing about my job and what it involved. I spent the majority of my day being micromanaged instead of being able to get on with what I actually needed to do. I saw a lot of nefarious dealings while I was there, like taking money from another charity in their group for projects that didn't exist. That money came from grants only to be used for that particular charity. They would also slag staff off on the regular and forget that all emails were saved on an internal database anyone had access to. I would regularly read emails bad-mouthing myself. In the end, before I was due on maternity leave, they caused me an injury at work. The cover-up and victim blaming began instantly, so I left and never looked back. Story 12. Sort of. I got close to it, close enough to see what that life would actually be like, and it sucked. It turns out I don't like working on celebrities. They're kind of annoying clients. It's not fun and glamorous. It's unnecessarily stressful, and I don't want to be a famous stylist or famous anything. It makes people weird. Mark Ruffalo is only normal because he hasn't figured out he's famous yet. I still enjoy doing hair, and I still like people for the most part. So I went with a more low-key path. I'm very happy with my choices. Sometimes on the way to your dream job, you have to make adjustments. Answer. I'm a regular hairstylist but want to switch to aesthetics because I'm drained from being neurodivergent and dealing with too many customers treating us like we're servants and beneath them. I originally wanted to specialize in hair color, but the majority of color services are women and 40 of my female customers were Karens or scammers. I switched to doing men's hair because it was rare for a man to cuss me out for the smallest thing, like one strand of hair being 2 millimeters too long for them. Legit something someone did once when I was still in training. But there's still definitely a fair share of them, especially the scammers still. At least in skincare, people are quiet or asleep, and there's not much you can do wrong. Story 13. Teaching at a college, I love my field and I love research. It's easy to ramble for hours on end about a topic. The passion and curiosity I held for my discipline, I thought, would make me a good instructor. What I did not expect was how much hatred, contempt, jealousy, and sabotage would come from administration. Oh, you're enjoying teaching an entry-level class with 30 students? We'll raise the cap so it has 75 enrolled. Have fun grading until you cry each week. Oh, you want to be an expert educator in one area? Then you get to be the unpaid consultant on all department exams on that topic. Enjoy rewriting 7 midterms for your colleagues with 1 week's notice. Oh, you haven't had a raise in 6 years? The football coach needs to be highest paid person in the state. If you ask for a cost of living increase again, we'll set the students against you by claiming inflation. Adjusted raises for instructors would result in doubling tuition costs for students. And so many of the students see the courses as box checking and are burnt out from previous bad educational experiences. I don't blame them, but no matter how hard I tried to be kind and share my excitement for the subject, it felt like throwing a dandelion into the Grand Canyon of despair. Answer. Being a TA for intro-level bio really made me reconsider my career path. No help from the lab manager, poorly designed labs, way too many assignments to grade. Most of the students don't want to be there, and students constantly not turning in assignments or handing in assignments, so poorly done it would be unacceptable at even a middle school level. Sure, tying for the upper-level courses was fun, but most of the students at those levels were the ones who actually tried at the intro level. Story 14. I got my dream job as a designer of skiing magazines, but then my workload doubled with no raise. The raises I was promised never came. All of the people I liked working with left, and things just got gradually worse. I left 3 months ago, and they still haven't been able to fill the position because they're offering a wage that was low 9 years ago for half of the work. Story 15. Teaching. Thought it'd be nice, but was totally not suited to it. Was dreadful at managing behavior and just couldn't understand how to plan or deliver lesson. I sucked. It amazes me how much teaching is promoted by the mass media and society as a anybody can do it job. It certainly isn't, and I met some unhappy colleagues who dislike it too, or that weren't suited to it either when I was there, but were trapped in it. Also, if you can't control a class, don't expect management to understand. They won't. They'll see it as your fault. To them, the school is their business, and the kids and their parents are their customers they want kept happy. Parental complaints look bad on you, so don't expect management to side with you or have empathy. They often see it as your fault and you as the problem. It definitely is a Marmite profession that comes back to your personality type. Just being able to manage kids alone isn't enough. It's so much more that requires a massive array of skills and talent. You either have the knack or you don't. And in my new profession now, I'm often asked why I left such a cushy job handy number like teaching. The same people won't believe me when I try to tell them and believe it's an easy gig. People appear to think because the holidays are good, it makes it a dream job and negates everything else. Answer. I thought I wanted to teach, and then I did an internship my senior year of college at the local high school. I quickly realized I love my subject far more than I love the kids. And to teach at the HS or lower level, you need to love the kids first and your subject second. I finished out my internship, set myself on a new path, and never looked back. Best decision I ever made. Story 16. I have been fortunate enough to land my dream job several times. Sometimes I actually hired into it, but most times I hired into another job, but was able to create a dream job for myself with an internal transfer after doing superlative work for a few years, and every single time it didn't last. No matter how well I did the job, no matter how profitable for the company, no matter how satisfied the customers, at some point upper management wants more and hires in additional management to improve the situation. The new management doesn't know what we do or how we do it and starts micromanaging until the dream job is a daily nightmare. Every single time. Idiot managers often don't even know what damage they have done until we all quit and the business collapses. Some of the worst management idiots even escape to a new promotion and suffer no consequences for the destruction. Still salty about it? Yes, I am. Answer, ugh. I've had that experience too. I worked part-time as brand rep at a pet store. I made decent money and got to talk to people about their dogs. I had a few other side gigs that were enjoyable enough and I made ends meet. The small batch dog food company was bought out by a big corp and all brand rep positions were cut. Then I got hired part-time on a ranch and kept with the side gigs. I didn't love the ranch, but I had a better work-life balance than I did at my 9-to-5 I worked at before the pet store. But after exactly a year, same exact time frame as the pet store, the ranch owner's up and moved suddenly, and I was again out of a job. I feel like the universe is just fudged with me at this point. Story 17. Doctor, currently working 7 a.m., 7 p.m., 6 days a week for months at a time. 4 weeks of vacation a year. I am getting paid about 12 per hour when you do the math out. That is residency. I wanted to help people, but this field takes advantage of that, and the hospital CEOs and decreasing insurance reimbursement takes advantage of that. I chose to do diagnostic radiology because this internal medicine lifestyle and workload is just ridiculous. Answer. My dad was a surgeon, retired now. I grew up with an in-home nanny and a father never around except for some of his vacation time to actually go do things. Otherwise, he was on call in surgery or doing his OR reports. Not saying people can't do it, but it is not a great profession for having a personal life or family, if single parent. He made good money, but was cheap, so that didn't matter either. Story 18. For sure, worked in forensics, and while the gruesome parts didn't affect me directly, I kind of lost my smile. It's a dark world, yet exciting. Worst part was for sure the workplace and how it was managed. Story 19. My dream job for a long time was being a paid writer and/or screenwriter. I've more or less reached that point where I'm making a living writing, but boy is it different than what I expected. I could be cut let go at any time. Years on a temp contract with no benefits. I get the weirdest notes on scripts by someone who has no idea what storytelling is. It's a lot of keeping your head down, producing content, and hoping it doesn't get noted to the point you have to restart. My freelance writing work is similar, where no one has what I dreamed of being an artistic vision. It's more we can shoot this in Los Angeles, so change it to Seattle, and then I have to go through the script and make the changes. A lot of it is just textual grunt work. I feel very lucky to have the opportunity to make a living like this. And when I say I'm a writer as my living, people get all starry-eyed. But the life of a working writer is really just implementing notes and trying to make it seem like no one else can do what you do. Story 20. I thought I wanted to be a manager, but ended up only having to deal with my employees' personal lives and feelings, and not having any time left to do the fun stuff, so I left. It clearly wasn't my thing. Answer. I got promoted to management, and the second week, I got called into a meeting by HR. Employee A keeps asking Employee B if they're gay. Employee B has no problem with the concept of being gay, but they have a problem with Employee A asking them about it constantly. WTF is wrong with people? And why do I have to deal with it all of a sudden? Yeah, I'd much rather be an individual contributor than deal with that nonsense. Story 21. A couple years out of college, I got my dream job working for the DA's office. I was the youngest employee by far. Upon getting interviewed, I let them know I had vacation planned for 10 days the next month. They said no problem. One of my big jobs was to print and highlight overnight arrests, so the prosecutors had a list of cases. Every morning, they'd go to the computer and hit print, and this gigantic stack of every inmate would print. This was a large city jail. Then you'd go through and highlight the new arrests. On day 2, I pointed out that you could ask the computer specifically for dates ranging from here to here, thus only printing the names we needed. The boss flipped, didn't trust it. We still had to print them all. Add in several similar instances of technology available in the office not being utilized efficiently. When I returned from vacation, I worked 3 hours of OT getting things filed. The next day I worked through lunch, then was called into a meeting. I was fired on the spot for being on unauthorized leave for 10 days. I'd already been replaced. Someone went back into the office and got my purse. I left the building absolutely shell-shocked, calling my husband from a payphone and crying. There is zero doubt in my kind that people felt threatened because of my knowledge. I thought I was making things easier around the office, but I obviously stepped on toes. It was satisfying a few years later when the prosecutor's office was cleaned out and the DA fired after an investigation of fraud abuse. Maybe I dodged a bullet? Answer: that has to be an unfair dismissal. Also, for the literal DA office, they seem awfully cavalier about personal data. You're printing out a list of everyone in jail, and presumably also which jail they're in, the date they were arrested, and what they're in for. What happened to this paper afterwards? Also, the obviously horrific environmental implications of wasting that much paper every day. Story 22. I always wanted to be a graphic artist. I wanted to pass by billboards that I designed, print ads I made, a portfolio with all my paid work and case studies. I even centered my major around it. When I got to the professional world of it, I found out it wasn't as fun as it was when it's just a hobby, not even close to how I thought it was going to be. The sleepless nights, the deadlines, moving goalposts brought by irrational revisions and indecisive stakeholders. It's draining. I shifted careers and started a job as a back-end software developer. I find it more enjoying. If the code quality passes and it works as expected, then I'm off the hook. No. Can you try a different font? I just want to see it. And what happens if you switch this and that? How is it going to look? Types of stuff. Fast forward, I'm on an architect designer role now. Best decision I've made for my long-term well-being. I still do graphic design, but it's for my passion projects now. Story 23. I've worked at a few nonprofits. I like my current job well enough, but some things I've noticed. 1. They tend to be filled with overdramatic people, more so than other jobs I've had like retail or fast food. 2. The pay ranges from sucks to poverty. Story 24. I got to work on 3D models in a large game studio. Turns out I dislike working in an office setting. I can't stand office culture, and they don't pay living wages for new employees. Now I get to help sick and injured people while living in a small mountain town, making enough money to buy a house and travel when I want. Story 25. I got my dream job right out of college. I wanted to work in sports, specifically Major League Soccer in the U.S. I've been a soccer fan my entire life, played it as a kid, and was pumped when MLS began in '96 in Kansas City, where I lived at the time, had a team. I went to college to major in engineering, figured that was a better choice of career. I figured out kind of quick that engineering wasn't my thing, so I switched to speech communication and decided that I would stay and do a master's in sports management in hopes of that giving me an edge. I managed to get an internship with the Chicago Fire while I was still in school. It basically consisted of working on a traveling soccer marketing sales experience with inflatable human football and target shot. It was fun as heck. I'd drive 2 hours each way from school to the Chicago suburbs on Saturday and Sunday during that season. I'd spend my own money to spend the night in a hotel if there was a game to work on the weekend. I loved it. They hired me full-time for the next season after I graduated, and I took over managing that marketing vehicle, as well as doing ticket sales. I absolutely loved working for the organization, but I disliked my job. I'm not a salesperson. I never got comfortable calling people and asking them to buy tickets. Didn't matter that all of my leads were previous customers and youth soccer families and teams. I wasn't nearly pushy or confident enough to be good at the job. I worked 7 days a week. If I wasn't in the office, I was out of soccer tournaments or league days. Game days were fantastic. It was the culmination of all of the work you put in, but we were working the entire time. I used to say that I would get to see about 90 minutes of play total through the 15 or 16 home game schedule, 7 days a week, 55, 70 hours usually, all for a starting salary of $16,000 plus commission for sales. Got an advance of $8K, so it was really starting at $24K. This was around the turn of the century, so it's not now, but that wasn't enough to really live on even then. My best year ever, I made $36K, and I was top 10 in the league in new season tickets sold. It helped that we bundled Manchester United v Bayern Munich tickets into our season packages, though that was a god-awful game itself. Eventually, the ownership fired the beloved general manager, brought in some jerk from the then NYNJ MetroStars, who then brought in an even bigger jerk to run ticket sales. And I took the hint and left. Bounced around a couple minor league outfits in the area before attending an open interview day at my current company and managed to get a job in supply chain. Starting salary was $4K more than I made in my best year at the Fire, and I've been at the same place getting promoted pretty consistently for the last 16 years. I am so glad that I got to work in sports. Probably wouldn't trade it, But my God, it sucked, and the office job I found after leaving has actually turned into my dream job. Story 26. I went to college to be an airline pilot. I worked as a flight instructor. I did an unpaid internship at an airline. Finally got hired, flew for 11 months, and then got furloughed with 300 other pilots for 3 years when the company got into trouble. After 3 years, they called me to come back. I go back through training and back flying again, but honestly, it had lost its luster. I was making significantly more money at the office job. At the time, 2007-2011, a regional jet pilot only made about $20K their first year and low 30s their second year. Also, while I was furloughed, I met my now wife. Also, the first year I flew, I lived next to the airport I was based out of, so I could just drive in whenever I had a flight. When I went back, I was based in Chicago and had to fly to sit around 4 or 5 days at a time in an apartment with 11 other pilots, called a crash pad, waiting to be called for a flight. One day I said, fudge it, called my old job, said I wanted to come back, but hey, how about a big raise? They said yes. I left a voicemail with the chief pilot's phone, hopped on a flight home, and that was that. Story 27. I dreamed of landing a job as a programmer at a large company like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. And after years of grinding, I finally made it. Only to find that making any sort of change was painfully slow with layers of bureaucracy. Sure, the pay was great, but after a certain point, it just became another paycheck. I'm considering quitting and working at smaller startups instead. Story 28. Yes, I did. I went to culinary school, worked my way up in restaurants as a woman, washing dishes, being the fry cook, closing 2 stations without a change of pay at a couple places, and finally made it to an upscale restaurant in DTLA where the owners still have, a great reputation in the industry. We were nominated for 2 Michelin stars while I was working for them. I was a pastry cook and worked directly with the owner head pastry chef. I finally had that job I worked so hard for, but I was extremely unhappy, unfulfilled, and burnt out. I came to realize that it was always going to be go, 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 and I was never fully going to be able to rest and spend time with family. I knew it was a laborious job going in, and I was ready. What I did not expect was that I was never going to be properly compensated. Cooks are extremely underpaid, overworked, and undervalued. It was a huge disappointment finding out that I would never make enough to live on my own, let alone start my own business, which was my end goal. I do not regret taking that path, though. When I began, I was shy, quiet, and didn't know how to speak up for myself. It doesn't happen with everyone, but working those 8 years in the industry toughened me up and gave me the confidence and courage I needed to accept that I was unhappy and had the option to change careers. Answer: kitchen work is terrible. It's shift work, so every week can be different. It's late hours, which promotes an unhealthy sleep schedule. Everybody is drinking heavily, on substances or both, including the owner. You eat the food you prepare, which means you likely have an unhealthy diet. You miss everything going on because the time that people have to relax is when you're working. Eventually, you develop this inferiority complex that your sole purpose in life is to serve the class of people that get to enjoy holidays, weekends, and nights out. It's awful. I don't miss it. Get out. Do literally anything else. Working construction is 100x's better. Working in the DMV would be at least 50x's better. Story 29. Police officer. I had dropped out of college and joined the Army before that. Did a tour in AFG as an infantryman during the surge and got a pretty full experience. Came back and decided to finish college intending to go back into the Army as an officer, but got sidetracked when I did an internship with the U.S. Marshals. I had a blast tagging along while they chased bad guys, and one of the guys I worked with convinced me to join the local PD that he had been in before because he'd had a great experience. I had a huge ego and figured if I had fought the Taliban, then being a regular old cop would be a cinch. I underestimated the hell out of the job. I was in an underfunded department in a gritty mid-sized city where every day almost was balls to the walls busy. Every day you do nothing but work with some of the worst human beings to exist, or you're trying to work within a broken justice or mental health system, half the time doing as much harm as good or just moving a problem around. After a couple of years on and a few really brutal critical incidents, I called it quits. I had made it through AFG without any serious mental health issues, but policing had given me such bad PTSD that I couldn't handle daily life situations like driving around town off duty or pumping my own gas. There's a lot of dislike for officers. Sometimes it's deserved, but most of the time it's way more complicated than people realize. I knew some cops who were just assholes who got into it for the wrong reasons, but honestly, the vast majority were really good people who truly wanted to do good and make their community better. Some were pretty jaded, some managed to stay weirdly positive, but I wasn't one of them. I'm in awe of anyone who can make a career out of it and not lose their mind. I'm a teacher now and way happier. I'm glad I did it, but I'm glad I'm done. Story 30. Sort of. I'd wanted to be a fighter pilot since I was like 3. I didn't make the cut when I was in pilot training for fighters, wound up flying something else, still had a great career. But by the end of my 20s, I realized I'd have to change up my career path if I wanted a chance to have a family, because being a military pilot alone wasn't enough to make me feel fulfilled. Story 31. At the age of 27, I was offered a job managing a lap dancing bar, in a city in Scotland back in the 90s. I thought single guy, lots of boobies and maybe even a chance of a date or two. 2 weeks till the honeymoon was over and the realization that the only people that visit these places are gangsters of every shade and bankers, people who work for banks. I was either shoot myself every night with the gangsters or screaming at bankers to stop touching the women, as that was a strict no-no. Anyway, couldn't handle the stress and left to manage a hotel bar, which was much more agreeable, LOL. Story 32. Currently dealing with this right now. Spent 2 years getting my M.Ed in Higher Education Administration. Worked full-time at a university while doing it. Sacrificed nights and weekends to volunteer in other capacities. I kept telling myself and my partner, now wife, that once I graduated, I would have more time and better balance. Last May, I was asked to apply for a job as assistant director of a job in Department and Student Affairs at the university I worked at. I took it. Since then, I have worked most nights and weekends. I am currently doing the work of 2 people and have never felt worse. My relationship with my wife has taken a toll. Last week, I hit a breaking point and made the decision to resign and told my supervisors that I will be out of this role by May. This is the first time in a year that I feel like I am doing something for myself. No job is worth one's mental health. Story 33. Worked at IBM. Dream job, especially as an OS2 user. The work itself was excellent, truly excellent. Building out huge nation-spanning WANs, deploying 1,000s of workstations and the associated servers at each site. Really fun stuff. But the bureaucracy, OMG, the endless, soul-crushing, pointless bureaucracy. I literally attended meetings about a meeting next month. That was about a meeting a few months out. That was a pre-meeting for a meeting to talk about a few hours of work. Hundreds of hours of time to talk about a few hours of work for 1-2 techs. Because the work was so good, I lasted 6 years. But eventually I told my boss to go fudge himself. After, for the 4th time, he tried to sneak a promotion past me in a review that would have made me a manager and also exempt from the $30K of overtime I was making each year. Story 34. I actually have my dream job. Growing up, I would watch ASPCA cops and love the idea of being a dog trainer or behavior person to help the damaged dogs get better and be adopted by loving families. I condemn a lot more dogs to passing and see broken dogs unable to be saved that ASPCA cops did not show, LOL. Story 35. Yes, got a good job as an IT systems administrator at a bank in my area. Went to college for 2 years to get a network admin degree and busted jerk getting 4 certifications to break into the industry. Landed the job before I even finished school. First job I ever had, and the benefits were great and the starting pay good considering I live in a poor region of my state. Fast forward 2 years and I am now unemployed. Submitted my 5 weeks notice and resigned voluntarily. Could not hack it. The stress overwhelmed me and I burnt out. It sunk me into a crippling depression that I am now struggling to crawl out of. I feel utterly defeated. Reality did not meet expectations. Answer: worked in IT operations and I feel your pain. The work never stops. There's always something that needs fixing or upgrading, and there's never enough time or staff to get it all done. I quit operations and now a business applications consultant doing similar work but getting paid a lot more with a lot less stress. Our company is vastly more organized than any of the clients we work for. Story 36. All of life's dreams are like that. I just met a guy in Key West. He chatted me up. Turns out he's been living on his 100,000-year sailboat for the last half-decade. He has sailed all across the Caribbean, from the Florida Keys to Jamaica, Mexico, spent a lot of time in Panama, then Colombia, Bahamas, basically you name it, and he's lived there. Been there, done that in paradise. He would anchor offshore, dinghy in with his skateboard and explore. I was envious. Then he told me that he was sick of it and was selling the boat. Done. Reminds me of when I bought my first Porsche. Was great for a while. Then one day, some lady backed into my mint condition Porsche and the fun was gone for me. Fixed it, sold it, don't want another one. In fact, I don't want any more stuff. Sick of it all. Story 37. QA tester for a video game company. I love games and gaming. Legitimately, on my days off from my current job, I can play video games 8 to 12 hours straight with only breaks for the bathroom. However, when it became a job for me, I absolutely dislike it. There is no freedom. You can talk about what you are working on with your gaming friends and buddies, either since you have strict NDAs for titles. You also have weird quotas for finding bugs in the game. It's so odd that quantity ends up becoming more of a priority than quality, especially if you are assigned something you actually care about. Don't even get me started on crunch times and how swaths of people get laid off so easily, even when they do great work. Answer: former Turtle AFPQA here. The part that always fudged with me was how devs would come to see you as the enemy. You're all overworked and underpaid, and it's your job to point out to them when their work is shoot, and with quotas, often you're just splitting hairs. And so they come to dislike you, and it just establishes this whole horrible adversarial dialectic. I feel like once upon a time, QA was seen as the way to get your foot in the door at a studio. And that's still kind of true, but it's such a misunderstood, mismanaged, and maligned department in almost every game studio that I feel like it's actually kind of toxic to your resume. I ended up doing a lot of odd gopher jobs across the industry to get the QA stink off my credentials, and I feel like it was only through a mentor taking a chance on me that I was able to start to segue into UX work. Story 38. I didn't really obtain my dream job, but I got close and saw that everyone who was doing it was a depressed loser on the deep down, and so I just didn't bother pursuing it anymore. Dream job was big law, and I got to the right law school for it. Sat in the big law panel where they talk about their jobs. They were all male body part and bragged about how they only sleep 3 hours a day. One of them was obviously on something, Adderall or cocaine. They seemed like a bunch of losers. But at least we have money. I didn't even bother. Few of my friends went into it and haven't heard from them since. I don't know what I was expecting. Probably the best people who are disciplined and not on fudge substances all day. Answer: lawyer on TV always looks very exciting, etc. But in reality, it's very boring. I'm not one myself, but my brother is partner of a law firm, and my ex was one. They both said it's a very boring job. It's the same with many jobs, be it teaching, forensics, or cops, etc. How it is presented on TV film is usually totally different to how it is in reality. Take teaching, for instance. And the movie Dangerous Minds, that's such beautiful bullshit. She comes in and can't control them, but then builds a relationship, wins their trust, and they cry when she wants to leave. In real life, if they are like that, you'll never control them, and they'll cheer when you leave. Story 39. I got an amazing, prestigious job, great pay, benefits, ego stroking, and community respect. The internal politics were brutal. The boss was a narcissistic nightmare. They proclaimed to be an ethical, thought-leading organization and were anything but. They treated staff so incredibly poorly. By my last few months, I was sleeping maybe 2-3 hours a night due to stress and was horribly depressed. This was my dream job and am still dealing with the repercussions of the stress. When I quit, the HR person cried and gave me a hug and told me how proud she was of me for standing up for myself. I was the first of over 90 staff turnover. I left for a part-time job making a quarter of the wage, but I started sleeping again. It was absolutely worth it. Now, 5 years later, I have a new job that's so much better, making almost as much. Story 40. Wanted to be an actress. Got a place at drama school. And the thing was that from day one, you learned that every basic thing you always did your whole life was wrong. Talking, going, standing, speaking, breathing, everything was wrong. But I guess that's okay, as this was to be expected. It's a hard job. Problem was that I had an accident while rehearsing, and the school gaslight me that this was my wrongdoing and that I was not meant to do that job if a light push would break my jaw, while actually someone fell full force with their knee straight in my face, while I laid, as instructed, with closed eyes on the floor. Long story short, that experience was very traumatic and I really couldn't do that job anymore. Story 41. Being a professor, the academe is full of know-it-alls and stuffy experts with attitude problems. Hard to work when it feels like you're walking on eggshells every time you approach a senior faculty member. Plus, they exploit the living hell out of the younger faculty members, saying that this is for experience when it is clearly just running tasks that they don't want to do. Story 42. Yes, because although I was good at it, very good actually, it wasn't something I wanted to do 6-8 hours every weekday. Story 43. Yep. Become a college athletic coach. Too many politics and people just wanting money and too prideful. I realize I just want to work with people and help them. I don't care about the sports side of things. Story 44. I wanted to run a lab and be a principal investigator in biotechnology. I got into a great grad school right after college and was part of a cutting-edge laboratory. I was on the fast track to the career of my dreams. As I learned more about what running a lab is actually like and how bureaucratic the academic sciences were, I just lost interest. I decided to leave my PhD program early with a master's instead, and I haven't really looked back. Story 45. Yes, job included incredible travel to gorgeous locations. Boss was an absolute out-of-control next-level cunt. Quit after a year. Story 46. I don't know if I ever will achieve my dream job, but seeing the stress in the video game industry makes me feel less down on myself. Story 47. Backstage politics. I became a pro wrestler, and I was on indies. But backstage politics, backstabbing, and people would get so jealous they would make up rumors and get you blue ball so they don't have to compete with you. I'm Ring Foon. Backstage, Story 48. I went to school for fashion merchandising. I had an internship in NYC where I was free labor for about 6 months at a top fashion house. It made me realize how out of touch the fashion industry is. And a lot of nepotism as well. It was a lot like Devil Wears Prada, but before Andy gets a makeover. Story 49. I played trumpet professionally for about 10 years. I was good enough that it was all I had to do to make a living. But the performances never brought me the satisfaction or fulfillment that I was looking for. I had to play most nights and weekends, and the pressure of maintaining skills to survive in a grinding, competitive environment made me miserable. I miss being around the people, but I don't miss the constant stress and doubt. Story 50. Not a dream job, but I got a job in aviation because I loved airplanes. Guess who dislikes airplanes now? Story 51. I wanted to be a teacher for the longest time. Both schools I worked at had different issues that told me the job just wasn't for me. The first was unreasonable expectations from the principal at a Title I school. I had to do intervention and basically had to teach the worst 5 readers in the class how to read using a method that normally would take 45 minutes. I had to do that in 20 minutes while the rest of class read quietly. This was nearly impossible, but on top of that, 95 of my students were 2 years below reading level because they were all ESL migrant community. The only students even close to their grade level were the white kids, whose parents worked for the school district. The principal was a complete jerk, didn't teach me anything, and our union rep called it the Afghanistan of teaching because the turnover rate was so high. The second was a substitute teaching job. I was on call for 2 years while coaching 2 sports, and they offered me the full-time sub job but never followed through. As a sub, it's nearly impossible to get ahead. Each January, I was broke because of the vacation time during December, and by the time I'd get ahead, it would be spring break. So for 2 years, I just partied too hard my time. At that point, I was just done with the whole profession. I had seen the poorest of the poor and the more well-off, and both sets of parents turn me off of teaching. I was literally fighting the students to do their work, their parents because their students wouldn't work, and the principal because it was apparently my fault. On top of that, full-time teachers make peanuts. It's an honorable profession, but you can't pay bills with honor. Story 52. I grew up with undiagnosed ADHD and so was labeled stupid and lazy enough to give me a humongous chip on my shoulder. When I was later diagnosed and treated, my dream job was basically anything that would allow me to prove that I was smart and capable. So I worked way too many hours, won some awards with my work in content strategy, and leveraged that to get a job at a big-name, prestigious FAANG company. Finally, I had a big shiny thing I could hold up to prove to everyone I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I loved the work, but the environment was miserable. The longest hours I've ever worked in my life, including when I was in the military, exposure to constant harassment on social media when I unwisely made my job public, ethical discomfort, toxic positivity, and intense, unrelenting pressure made my mental health plummet, even as I received the praise I had craved, both professionally and personally. I didn't realize how burned out I was until my whole org was deprioritized and then cut in the recent big tech layoff. After a week or so of rest, I realized that, for the first time in a few years, I had the space to think. Suddenly, I was able to spend time with my partner. I could go for walks and spend time in cafes. I could read for fun instead of constantly reading to upskill and professionally grow. I recently watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it ended up being the final blow I needed to wake up. My world had become so darn small over the past few years. Everything had become reduced down to work, and even that was reduced down to a very small number of work options that would ensure no one could ever label me stupid or lazy again. But as I left the theater and sat in my car, I kept thinking about all the paths and all the lives each of us has available to us. They're infinite, and the choice is entirely up to us. I'm not letting the voices of all the people who've demeaned me make that choice for me any longer. I'm proud of me, and I'm going to be proud of me no matter what I do. I don't need to prove myself to anyone anymore, and so now I'm back to figuring out what I want to do with my life while doing work in an environment that doesn't harm me and actively makes me happy. Answer, dude. Fudge, same almost to a T, undiagnosed ADHD until late 20s, labeled stupid and lazy my whole life, and just wanting to prove myself without actually knowing what I want and who I am, and I'm on the way to burnout. I fudge love my job, but I'm pouring all of myself into it while neglecting myself and my hobbies, and I don't know who I am at this point without my career, and also the similarities in name. I fudge dig it. I hope you're doing better and enjoying life more and finding yourself. Story 53. My current job is what I think is probably a lot of people's dream. I work in a book bindery. Often I'm in shipping, doing the most asinine shoot, literally sticking stickers on boxes all day. I've exhausted all the music I love, all the YouTube channels in any subject I'm interested in, and any subject related to that. I try to learn as much as I can about electronics and related math, but you only get so much from listening. I get home and I'm tired as shoot, bloated, out of shape. It's absolute torture. Kinda makes me miss FedEx sometimes, if only they weren't shoot sketchballs. Story 54. Video game tester. Not really a dream job, but thought it would be really cool. It wasn't that great. Worked for Activision and felt like they just treated testers like cattle. They'd hire a bunch of people for a project and let most of them go when it was complete. You would just be assigned to a game you couldn't pick at all. Everyone I knew worked on shoot games that nobody wanted to play. You'd be playing it 8 hours a day for weeks or months. A lot of it isn't even really playing the game, but completing QA checklists. You had zero input on the gameplay or balancing or anything like that. Story 55. I worked as a guitar teacher for 6 years in France. I thought it would be awesome, but I ended up being exploited and underpaid by the music school I worked for. I can't recall how many times I was asked to play for free because it will bring you a lot of exposure. Students canceling 2 hours before their lessons and then trying to guilt trip me into not paying was also a major pain. And I was so tired of explaining that yes, this is my real job. I quit 3 years ago and now I have a regular job. I work on my music on the side and I'm much happier this way. This is the problem with artistic jobs. People will try to take advantage of you because you enjoy what you're doing, so you're more inclined to do it for cheap free. Story 56. Kinda. I spent a couple decades in corporate companies with dreams of climbing the ladder. Eventually decided it was a toxic, nasty places and headed for greener pastures at a mom-pop small business. The small business was just as bad. A carpet versus concrete internal culture. Using temps to do most of the work for as little pay as possible. So when I suggested more sustainable practices, I was invited to leave. Thinking that was just a bad apple, I tried another mom pop, a well-respected company in my community. Straight up thieves at times, mostly on the up, but if they thought they could falsify something for more money, hey did. Broke all kinds of employment laws, just as horrible, worse really. Left there and back at a big company that so far seems a bit better than most. Answer, I worked for 2 small businesses and am over it. The pressure and attention from higher ups is way too intimate. Since it's the business they built, it's their way or the highway, even if it's to the detriment of the company. Things are taken much more personally, you have little work boundaries, established processes, and the pay and benefits are usually terrible because they pull the, oh, I'm just a small company. If I pay you a living wage, we'll go bankrupt routine. Just give me the anonymity of bureaucracy. Story 57. I am a programmer. I love my job, but it's giving me a constant headache and sometimes even anxiety because if I can't finish a project in time, my boss is probably going to scream at me or my coworker just because we're extremely short-staffed and we need more people. But my boss thinks it's only typing on a keyboard. How hard could that be? I love my job. I love being a programmer, but trust me, it's not as good as you might think. Even when you're home, you will think about work because you work with your brain. And your brain does not stop working. You are training your mindset to be a programmer most of the time, and it's hard not being one. On the bright side, I do most of the things in the house since I can work my ways around most things. Story 58, twice, because I turned my hobby, something I did in my downtime that I loved and really enjoyed and was my go-to after a hard day or a crap day at work, into work. Both times it became a chore and not fun or enjoyable because I was doing it for a living, and it left me with not much to do out with work. It turned the thing I would turn to when things were shoot at work into the thing that was shoot. Or Story 59. What I'm learning from this thread is that every profession pretty much sucks if you have to interact with people at all. Also, that corporations and crazy capitalist demands are ruining the highly needed professions like healthcare, teaching, customer service jobs, etc. It's horrible but also oddly comforting knowing we're all going through this together. Story 60. All through college, I wanted to be a software engineer. I got the job and disliked everything. The work was tedious, the impact I was making was minuscule, and my team was constantly shoot on and underappreciated. I also realized I could definitely do more than code for the rest of my life. Story 61. When one dreams about a job, we tend to mostly focus on the positives, usually exaggerate them as well. Many negatives are downplayed, some unknown. Unfortunately, the reality of any fantasy rarely lives up to the expectations. Story 62. I was told I was going to hire and build out a sales team. I spent 3 months learning the business by doing nothing but cold calls. I bailed. What's wild is they hired a recruiter to find me. Story 63. Perhaps not me, but my best friend. She spent 3 years in college after high school to become a game developer. She got a position as an unpaid apprentice for 3 months in a game company and now works as a full-time game designer there. I have never seen her as stressed and miserable as she is now. They have a shoot ton of deadlines all the time, and I'm kind of a buffer between her and the feedback of the game community online. People are fudge mean and ruthless to the game devs, so they were advised not to look at the comments on their work themselves and have someone doing it for them to filter out the toxicity. Story 64. Yeah, I wanted to work on space stuff, got a software engineer degree, ended up working on an instrument on a satellite. Can't really say more than that without revealing too much. The job is interesting, but everything is so awfully slow. Basically, between making a decision and getting the result of that decision, changing a setting and seeing how it affects data, a whole month has passed. Projects last a long time. They're planned on full decades, maybe more. Stuck on a shoot instrument that's badly designed? Welcome to dealing with it for the next 10 years. I wouldn't say horrible, but certainly not for me. I got the degree, and I actually enjoy programming, so it's not like I'm stuck or anything, and the experience can only be seen positively for future endeavors. But I don't know what I want to do now. Answer: yeah, wanted to work on space stuff. I have a CS degree with and some professional experience in robotics, and until a friend encouraged me to interview for a software engineering role at a space company, I didn't think I had a shot without domain-specific knowledge. The interview wasn't hard compared to what a potential SDE2 would go through for FANG, and despite HR changing the team I was interviewing with 3 times, I managed to land an offer. When I started, it turned out that technical content was not what I had interviewed for, and I was expected to start contributing almost immediately. Despite playing catch-up, schedules were arbitrary and erratic, the team was toxic, and already understaffed even before other engineers transferred out, and the management could charitably be described as doing their best. I wish I could have made it work, but being a decent developer and having a passion for space are simply not enough to compensate for a bad situation. Story 65. I wanted to work in film and television. I worked in the industry for 5 years, and while I met a lot of cool people, the hours are horrible, and you are always looking to book the next gig. Then I decided to work in a commercial production house in the office, where you have more stability, but I still didn't love it. It wasn't really the dream job. Story 66. It turns out that knowing if I make a mistake, many people will die is very stressful. My industry is understaffed and very essential, so I can't leave. Story 67. Yes, I obtained full-time work in emergency management. Not easy. They should call it political management. You very rarely actually manage any sort of emergencies. It's mostly keep busy projects to make your hiring managers seem busier than they really are. Story 68. Sort of story here. I live about 4 hours away from a very popular vacation spot. All year round, people from major urban centers go there. And for good reason, it's gorgeous. For years, I had always said if I was going to move anywhere, it would be there. Well, a few years ago, I got a job offer to work in that very city at a decent paying job. After a year there, I moved back home because it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. The weekends were insane, couldn't do anything in the city. Our rent was way more than any working person could afford. Dating was rough because so few people actually lived there. Most were just seasonal or vacationing. It was very hard to make friends for the same reason. Grass isn't always greener. Story 69. I spent a decade of my life becoming as fluent as a non-native speaker could be in Arabic and various regional dialects, with extensive travel experience in North Africa and the Middle East, and several graduate degrees to boot, so that I could land my dream job working for a major international humanitarian org, working with refugees. I learned quickly that so much of the gratification one might glean from such work is all but stripped away by learning how aid agencies are funded, allocate funds, and just generally work to do the work they purport to do, and often just don't. Add to that how rampant unqualified workers are in that industry, how many of them get their jobs through connections rather than merit and qualifications, and how so many people pursue and get into that line of work for the professional capital and LinkedIn cred. I don't know. I was immensely disillusioned. All that aside, though, if you can somehow look or get past all of that, so much of the work on the ground legitimately is pretty heartbreaking and depressing, and emotional burnout is very high. I left all that behind to run an engraving studio with a couple of my friends, and while the work isn't as sexy, there's an honesty and an authenticity to working with your hands and doing creative work. In our third year now, and I've been able to grow my salary to more than what I was making at a prestigious job with 3 degrees, so mostly feeling okay about it. Story 70. As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a dancer. I would dance in the house, in town, in front of street performers, to the embarrassment of my parents, and in the studio. By the time I was in college, I was majoring in dance performance and spent 3 hours of dance training a day, plus 4 hours of rehearsal at night. Besides that, I worked out for an hour on most days to strengthen my body. I got hired as a full-time professional dancer in a well-recognized modern dance company. The company is known for their physicality, so they needed dancers who would swing on ropes, do gymnastics, and generally do weird shoot. I loved that and was so hungry to get the job that I did whatever they asked of me. It's probably worth mentioning that I was also very thin at the time. They loved how lean I was, and I realized my aesthetic was a large part of my appeal. On the outside, my life was what kid me dreamed of. I traveled to Greece, Italy, Canada, Amsterdam, and throughout the U.S. My accommodations were paid for, and I got a stipend plus hourly pay and minimal insurance. I cried almost every day. Not exaggerating. The people in the company were very personally difficult for me to be around. Aesthetics were king, and everyone was always doing photo shoots for IG and talking about their bodies. As someone with a complicated relationship with food and my body, it was so unhealthy to be in that environment. The company owners were also very eccentric, but mostly in a negative way. The director was notorious for hitting on the female dancers. How he met his wife, by the way. He was pretty harmless, but thinking back, I can see how problematic it was. I can remember him saying he wanted to choreograph something in the studio, just the two of us. Then he said it was going to be an intimacy-themed performance, and he wanted to lead me around by my nose ring. I'm all for creativity, but that was not the vibe. His wife was there and just walked away. I don't know if she heard him, but given history, I'm sure she knew it was a possibility. I also had to have a roommate, and I am a very private person. I like to have my own space to decompress, especially since I was going through a lot at the time. By the end, I had a stomach ulcer, which I had to dance through, multiple reoccurring injuries, just wear and tear of the job, and had multiple call-ins for my weight. I was never unhealthy and was still considered athletic, but the hell I was putting my body through showed. And it seemed to reflect in how some of the other dancers treated me. I know this was very long, so congrats if you made it to here. It felt cathartic to write and release. While it was a very hard, lonely time in my life, it built me into who I am today. Now I have a caring partner, as well as friends and family, live in a peaceful place I love, and am excelling at my job. I'm so grateful to be here, and I can honestly say the best thing I ever did was quit my professional dancer career. Story 71. Many times job interviews or job descriptions are more optimistic than they really are. You go in with the description you were told, only to find out that nothing is as they say it is. Story 72. How about do this backwards? I went to a job I had no real interest in, grew, I now have my dream job. I don't think I change what I do ever. Story 73. When I went to college, I knew I wanted to be an engineer, and that's what I did for 37 years. However, I'm going to say that 34 of the people I went to engineering school with never took engineering jobs. They went often to all sorts of fields. To each their own, I guess. Story 74. I wanted to be a scientist. Did undergraduate degree in TBH, already knew that was not a field for me. Did a PhD because I knew I didn't really like science, but I didn't know what I did want. Did a postdoc position, scientist, dislike it. Underpaid AF. I dislike the publish or perish stressful nature of science, and the position is only 2 years, so no stability. You're supposed to do like 2-4 of these positions before any hope to get anything permanentish. Maybe became a scientist at a medical company startup. I still don't like science, but I do get paid well enough that I am not desperate to start anything new. Story 75. For me, I always wanted to be a nurse. I just knew I wanted to help people, and I couldn't wait to feel accomplished with my career choice. I finally became a nurse, and I worked in the OR, and I was absolutely abused at my workplace. I dislike every moment of it, and I couldn't stand how the surgeons essentially thought the nurses were lesser than. Prior to actually obtaining my degree, I had worked as a house float nursing assistant and saw every single unit. From that experience, I knew I could never be a floor nurse. So I was absolutely discouraged when I realized the OR was never going to be matched for me. Not only that, but nursing has no solid career ladder, the administration disliked nurses, salaries are laughable, and patients are horrible. I left and am still in a science-related degree, but not working as a nurse anymore. I have a much better job with a beautiful 6-figure salary and have an absurd amount of days off and a career ladder that goes to the moon. I definitely ended up so much better than I ever could have predicted. Story 76. Dream jobs are bullshit. Yay, I had the dream job I always wanted. I was a PR writer for an organization I really supported. I was absolutely miserable. The commute was too long. My day was too long. I was not adequately trained and then told I wasn't up to par. I took the train an hour and 15 minutes to and from.